Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Days at Home 2020 at the University of New Mexico. This presentation is entitled Everything You Need to Know About LoboVirtualDesktop, or VDI, at UNM. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, or VDI in general, some of the history at UNM, and the latest iteration of VDI that we're deploying now, which is called LoboVirtualDesktop. It's actually a really exciting and cool service, and we hope that you'll find it very valuable and useful. So this presentation, it's really for everyone, technical, non-technical. If you just have an interest in this type of thing in general, I think there'll be some value here. So I recommend you stick around. If nothing else, you can skip to the end and see the demo and kind of see some of the usage tips and see how you request access. So my name is Neil Sabol. I work on the Enterprise Managed Systems and Services team. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. Okay, so this is what you can expect if you watch this presentation. We're going to first talk about what VDI is in general and why you should care about it, especially in the context of being a student, faculty, or staff at the University of New Mexico. I want to talk a little bit about the history of VDI at UNM. You may or may not know, we've actually been using VDI in some capacity since probably around 2015, and you may even have used it and not known what you were using, and we'll talk about that a little as well. We'll introduce the Lobo Virtual Desktop service, which is the newest iteration of VDI that we're deploying at UNM. And we'll talk a little bit about the technology behind that, compare and contrast that with the previous technology we were using to deliver VDI. We'll talk a little bit about Lobo desktop functionality in general, just give you some quick tips and must-know things if you're going to launch into using this service. And then finally, we'll talk about the access request process, which is pretty straightforward. We put some work into that to make that as quick and seamless as possible for you. And then one last note, on June 4th, we're having our live Tech Days 2020 at home, and Luke Abeling from the Enterprise Managed Systems and Services team is actually going to be doing a live demonstration of Lobo Virtual Desktop. So whether you watch this before or after, hopefully it's before and you have an opportunity to attend Luke's pitch because it's pretty good. He's a really sharp guy. He'll be able to answer a lot more questions than what you're going to get from this kind of one-way asynchronous presentation from me. Okay, so what is VDI and why should you care? Those are good questions. So the short answer is VDI is just an acronym for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. Now I'm sure that was infinitely helpful. That's exactly what you wanted to know, and that's the only reason you attended this presentation. So you can stop now. You know everything you need. Okay, I'm just kidding. So yeah, VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, that's still a little bit vague. What this really is the technology that allows you to securely access desktop applications from your own personal device without actually installing the apps or investing in specialized hardware that might be required to run the apps. And that's still, a little bit vague there. So let's give an example. Say there's an application that I'm using for a class or for something else at UNM that only runs on Windows 10. It's just something the vendor only released to run on Windows 10. Nothing else. Doesn't run on Mac, doesn't run on iOS, doesn't run on Android. So what you may end up doing is going on campus and going to a computer lab or someplace else to run this application if you don't have a Windows 10 device. So VDI kind of solves for that problem by allowing you to install a tiny client on your own device. That's the Microsoft Remote Desktop client, which is available for virtually everything. I mean, that runs on Windows, it runs on macOS, it runs on iOS, it runs on Android, virtually every platform. So you install this little app on your device, and that app allows you to connect remotely to a server in a data center that's running a version of Windows that the application need to connect to actually runs on. So in essence, you're getting the application delivered to your device through VDI, but your device isn't actually running the application. It's just connecting to another server that's running it. So this is really a game changer in terms of security and in terms of ease of use. This also means that you can save yourself trips to labs at UNM. So if you have an application you need to access that you can't normally run on your device for whatever reason, either it's not compatible, maybe your device is too old, whatever the situation is, you can now access all these applications remotely through VDI from the comfort of your home, from a coffee shop, from your dorm, wherever you are. All you need is internet connectivity, and you just need to install this little Windows Virtual Desktop client on your device, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're really no strangers to VDI at the University of New Mexico. We've been using VMware Horizon in some capacity since around 2015. And in fact, you may have used this yourself and not known that it was VDI, or maybe you did, which is awesome. So probably the most visible use case we've had for VDI since 2015 has been what we call the kiosk computers that are, for instance, outside the Lobo lab and in various other locations around campus. Those are those tiny little thin computers or thin clients as we call them that you log into, you can access your email, access Office, do printing, do things of that nature. So that's probably been the most common thing that VDI has been used for. The VDI is powered by VMware Horizon. And it is worth noting that kiosk use case is kind of a wonky use case for VDI, to be honest. So in the previous slide, we talked about, installing this little client on your personal device. Well, in that kiosk scenario, really the kiosk is your quote unquote personal device. I mean, that's what you're using to access the resources. So you're not really managing that kiosk per se as you would your personal device. And the kiosk you can obviously only get to when you're standing in front of it, right? So it's really not offering you the convenience of being able to use your own personal tablet or your own phone or your own laptop from home to access resources that are presented with VDI. There are a couple of other things that it's been used for as well. There are a couple of IT specific apps that have been delivered with Horizon, and there's actually a lower level geography course. I think it was based partially on ArcGIS, and that course was actually offered 100% remotely and based on VMware Horizon as well. So there are a couple things out there, but all in all, not a lot of people have used this. So why was that? I mean, the first thing was we didn't really market or, promote this very heavily. And that was partially because we knew there were kind of underpinning issues involved with that. And those were costs and technical barriers that would have to be overcome. So Horizon is an on-premise solution, and scaling an on-premise solution like that requires capital expenditure, right? It requires a lot of upfront investment. And it's really hard to do that effectively if you don't know what the usage or adoption or load is going to be. So that's one of the barriers that we had. In addition, the technology stack was pretty complicated, and it required a lot of management end to end by UNM IT staff. So I'm not going on the record and saying we're lazy or incapable. It's just a very complicated solution, and when you have 0.25 of a full-time employee dedicated to it, it gets to be cumbersome and it gets to be a lot of work to keep up with. But all these things said, Windows Virtual Desktop or LoboVirtualDesktop solves almost all these problems and gives us a very nice cloud-native, scalable way to deliver VDI. We'll talk about that in a second. So as I'm sure you've picked up on, I've referred to Lobo Virtual Desktop, Windows Virtual Desktop, and several other things no less than 10 or 15 times in the previous slides. And I didn't really give you a lot of context as to what those are. So that's what this slide is for. We're going to talk about that. At a high level, Lobo Virtual Desktop is the next chapter in UNM's VDI story. The short answer is Lobo Virtual Desktop is really just a UNM branded version of a service. That's just what we're calling the service internally. Windows Virtual Desktop is the Microsoft name for the service. So this is a service that runs in Microsoft Azure. It's provided by Microsoft and is relatively new, right? I mean, this Windows Virtual Desktop has only been around for probably the last 12 months or so. And I believe it came out of preview only in probably the last 6 months or so. So this is pretty brand new, cutting edge stuff. And Microsoft really had a lot of foresight here, and I think a really great idea about the direction of this and how this service can help organizations. So we're very fortunate to be able to adopt this and jump into it. And as I noted before, Windows Virtual Desktop or Lobo Virtual Desktop, it really addresses some of the shortcomings and issues that we've had with our Horizon solution historically. So this really gives us a good path forward with more predictable costs and lets us make better decisions and do a lot of things with scaling and cost savings that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So without getting too far into the weeds here, I wanted to quickly overview the technology behind Windows Virtual Desktop or Lobo Virtual Desktop and kind of show you each piece and the separation of duties and responsibilities between each. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like in Horizon so you can see for comparison, and hopefully see the value in the Lobo Virtual Desktop solution. So first things first, over here on the far left, this is just the client piece. So I talked about before, when you're using Lobo Virtual Desktop, or even if you had been using Horizon, there's a little client that you have to install on your device. So the client's available for many different types of device, Windows, Mac, Android. There's even a web-based client if you have none of those operating systems. It runs on pretty much any HTML5 compliant browser. So this is kind of the customer managed piece, right? I mean, customer managed, maybe that's a strong word because there's not really a lot of management involved, right? I mean, you go to the App Store, install the app, configure it, and you're done. It updates automatically over time. There's not much more to it. So, management is probably a strong word, but that's the responsibility of the person consuming the service. So what Microsoft offers with Windows Virtual Desktop and where the magic and secret sauce is in this middle piece here. So this is a bunch of backend Windows RDS infrastructure, including gateways and brokers and databases and other things to keep track of sessions. So we don't have a lot of visibility into this as UNM IT staff. This is something that's fully managed by Microsoft, and this is actually something that consumed a lot of the management time and a lot of the resources to maintain in Horizon. So this is in essence offloaded to Microsoft with Windows Virtual Desktop. They're providing this at scale to hundreds of thousands of customers worldwide, and they tend to deliver this very well. Certainly better than we can with 0.25 FTE dedicated to it internally, right? So this is really where the beauty of Windows Virtual Desktop is. And what's more, since we're already paying for Microsoft licensing, this piece is free, right? We're not paying any more for this. This is already included in our licensing costs. So there's really, no cost delta here. Um, so lastly, we have this piece, and this is the piece that we actually manage here within UNM Information Technologies. As you can see, customer managed here. So this includes the actual virtual desktops themselves, and that would be the apps that run on them, the configuration, who has access, things like that. And of course, that's all tied into our Active Directory, so we can permission people accordingly and grant them access based on what roles and applications they need. So this is pretty nice. The other nice thing about this is Horizon was always powered by more, server class machines. And Windows Virtual Desktop actually introduces Windows 10 multi-session, which is really a Windows 10 machine, but multiple users can log into it at once via remote desktop. So, I mean, I'm sure you've read there have been hacks for terminal services since it's been around to allow you to do this in obviously an unauthorized and illegal way with various versions of Windows. But Microsoft, as part of Windows Virtual Desktop, has made that an official thing, provided that you're running the Windows 10 machine in Windows Virtual Desktop. So this basically allows us to use the same applications and packages that we'd use in a lab on these Windows Virtual Desktop machines. We can deploy them with SCCM and our other management tools in exactly the same way we deploy them in the labs. So it really kind of consolidates and standardizes on the application packaging and deployment process, which is great because that was not always the case with Horizon. Many times things would have to be packaged and sequenced in different ways to make them available, which, it's obviously a different one-off process. When we do things like that, we tend to get into trouble, and it's a lot more to maintain than having one way to do it. So I think this is really exciting. It's great to have this kind of middle tier piece offloaded to Microsoft. It's not something we have to worry about. Scales automatically. Everything's awesome. And then we can also standardize our own processes in the terms of maintaining apps and desktops in the piece of Windows Virtual Desktop that we are actually responsible for. And in terms of cost, it is worth mentioning. So most of the cost that we incur with Windows Virtual Desktop or Lobo Virtual Desktop really is in this customer managed piece. And that's because, we have to provision desktops and provision enough desktops for people to be able to access the applications they need at the same time without having performance issues. So that's really where the expenditure is in this case. But the good news is it's not a capital expenditure, right? We're not laying out a huge amount of money up front and saying, well, this needs to serve us for the next 5 years or whatever, and this many people. And that's a differentiator. So we can scale the virtual desktops themselves up and down to accommodate changes in load. So, I mean, for instance, over the summer, enrollment's a lot lower typically than it is during the fall and during the spring semesters. So we really don't need to run all the desktops at full capacity during that time. We have breaks throughout the year, right? We have winter break, we have spring break, we have other things where the load definitely decreases compared to other times of year. There's really no need to run these desktops at full capacity during those times either. Similarly at night, I mean, we see with the labs, most of the usage occurs during the day. So we do scale down these desktops at night as well to save cost. And that's a beauty of kind of a pay per use cost versus a capital expenditure, which is what we are looking at with the VMware Horizon VDI solution. I mean, we'd have to buy a bunch of servers up front, spend $100,000 and say, well, this is the cap, this is all we can do. And unless we're running those servers at 100%, 100% of the time, we're really not getting the maximum value from that financial arrangement. Okay, so let's take a look at the legacy Horizon piece. And this is kind of the architecture for that. And I mean, looking at this, right, just comparing kind of one for one. I mean, if you glance at these two, you can see which one's more complicated. And the interesting thing is, in terms of Horizon, there's still kind of these levels of separation and management. So, right, this is kind of the same. The user devices, the client managed devices. So this is where you'd be installing the VDI client on your personal device and connecting. The difference here is, though, literally all of this stuff is UNM IT managed. There's really no vendor managed piece in here at all. So with this Horizon solution, we are having to manage this basically end to end, every aspect of the solution, connection brokers, universal access gateways, Active Directory, the servers that are running it, the app volumes, the virtual apps, all of that stuff. And kind of speaking of the app volumes, so this was when I was talking about packaging and how we're able to standardize on our processes. This app volumes with VMware Horizon was actually a really neat feature, but it was a completely different process for packaging and delivering applications and what we're using for all of our desktops, basically for the desktops in the labs, for our staff and faculty desktops and all that. It was a completely different thing. So if we wanted to install Office in both VDI and in a lab, we'd have to package it two different ways, which is kind of painful. So that's another one of the things that Windows Virtual Desktop takes care of for us. But in terms of this, as you can see, I mean, really just the simplification. And we talked about costs a little in the previous slide. You know, all these servers that we see in here, for the Horizon solution, these are things that would have to be spec'd out and bought, upfront costs. So we're talking maybe $30,000 a server, expense that out over 5 years. So there are huge capital expenditures involved here, right? And there wasn't a lot of room for scaling. So if we bought X number of servers, thinking we're going to have X number of users, and we either had substantially less or substantially more. If we had less, well, we in essence wasted our money. If we had more, then the solution would perform poorly because it was under a very high load. We either have to spend more money to buy more servers, or we'd have to just cap the number of users and reduce the experience in some way. So this is really where the beauty of the cloud comes in my opinion. As you can probably tell, I'm a huge proponent of using the cloud in situations where it makes sense, and I definitely think that this VDI for UNM is one of those. Okay, so let's dive into Lobo Virtual Desktop functionality. Before I get too far into this, FastInfo 7828 is going to be your friend in terms of Lobo Virtual Desktop. So I highly recommend you review that FastInfo, maybe even bookmark it, because it has a lot of information about Lobo Virtual Desktop, including the common things as well as some maybe uncommon or one-off weird things you might run into. So that's a great resource in terms of troubleshooting and getting information about Lobo Virtual Desktop. But let me just talk through some of the very high level and very key things that you must know if you're going to start using this solution. So we offer both an app and a full desktop experience. The full desktop experience is really tailored more towards student and faculty this time, and the app experience is tailored more towards staff. So this isn't to say that you can't request both of them if you have one of those roles. So, I mean, if you're a student, you can definitely request apps that would be available to staff. I mean, if something that you both use, like maybe Adobe Creative Cloud or something like that, or maybe Office 365 like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, those types of things. So you can request either or. You just have to choose a different affiliation, which we'll look at in one of the other slides. And likewise, if you're a staff and you really want the full desktop experience, you would just say your affiliation is student or faculty and request that. So the full desktop, that's what we're going to actually look at when we do the demo in the next slide. But that's in essence, from your device, you're connecting to another computer basically, and you're presented with a full desktop. You see the start menu, you see the desktop background, the icons on the desktop. You're pretty much immersed in that desktop. The app experience is a little bit different. So in the next slide, you'll see, and we're not going to cover this, but you'll see the apps are just a bunch of little icons that appear in the same workspace that the full desktop icon does. When you launch an app, it kind of makes the app look like it's running on your device. So it appears just in its own window, kind of floating on top of your existing, windows and things you have open on your device. Again, it's kind of up to you. We found that the full desktop experience is generally easier to deal with for most folks, so that's why we really recommend that. But again, feel free to try whichever one you prefer, but do note that not all applications will be available through the app experience, right? The full desktop experience is guaranteed to pretty much have everything, whereas the app experience might not. Another thing to note is not all remote desktop client apps automatically detect and configure the feed for UNM's Lobo Virtual Desktop. So on Windows, it's mostly automatic. You don't really have to deal with the feed at all. You simply install the Microsoft Remote Desktop app, log in with your Lobo Mail email address and password, and it'll detect and connect you to our resources pretty much automatically. On Mac, things are a little bit different. There's actually a feed URL that you have to paste in. So that's in the Fast Info answer. We'll look at that in the next slide during the demo as well. But it's just something to be aware of. On the Mac, it's not really just a click, log in and go situation. There is this extra step of having to paste in the feed. And the good news is you only have to do that one time. Once you've done that, it's configured and you can use the Microsoft Remote Desktop app going forward. Okay, so moving files to and from LoboVirtualDesktop, we recommend OneDrive for Business for that. And so what you do in that scenario is basically on any device where you have files you need to access, you would install and configure OneDrive for Business. That way your files are kept in sync across all your devices, including your LoboVirtualDesktop instance when you connect to it. And we'll look at that in the demo as well. There are definitely other ways you can do this. I mean, you can use folder redirection. Drives get mapped from your personal device to your LoboVirtualDesktop in some scenarios, but it's just, that experience is pretty sluggish and it's pretty jerky to say the least. So OneDrive is really smooth, frictionless, fast, and so we recommend you use OneDrive. Just get that configured anywhere you have data, and just it'll help keep all your data in sync. So if you make a change to something LoboVirtualDesktop and then need to log in, make some change later on your own device, the change will be there. When you log back into LoboVirtualDesktop, so you haven't logged in for a couple of days, anything changes that you saved there previously, OneDrive will have saved and synced those, so they'll be there when you log in again. And so lastly, I talked a little bit about scaling up and down and load in the previous slides. So we do, at least for the near future, as this solution is rolled out, we cycle LoboVirtualDesktop twice daily, basically, once at 6:30 a.m. and once at 6:30 p.m. So what we've observed is the load is generally a lot lower on these machines overnight. So we have a lot fewer people working. I mean, not to say people don't work overnight. We know they do, and we know that homework you have some tight deadlines you need to get that stuff done. But generally speaking, we find that the load's reduced overnight. So what we do to save money is we scale back LoboVirtualDesktop instances twice a day. Unfortunately, this requires a brief outage. So if you're logged in, around 6 a.m. or around 6:30 p.m., you'll get a notification saying, hey, you need to save your work and log out prior to 6:30, or you might lose data. So if you get that prompt, I mean, that you have 30 minutes left at that point, but you definitely want to finish up what you're doing, save, and then exactly at 6:30 a.m. or p.m., the machines will actually reboot and come back. So it doesn't mean you're locked out for long. I mean, when that happens, you can log back in within probably 10 minutes, maybe even less. But just be aware that we do kick people off twice per day, just for periodic maintenance and in the interest of scaling things to optimize our costs. Okay, so let's take a look at the process of setting up and accessing LoboDesktop on a Mac. The reason I chose a Mac for this is because the process is actually a little bit more involved on Mac than it is on Windows. So Windows takes away a couple of the steps, but I figure if we show you the more challenging way here, then it'll make more sense when you have to do this on Windows. So first, let's open Safari and we'll go to Fast Info. Again, the main reason for going to Fast Info is it has all the links and things we need, so we don't need to memorize what those are. We can just click on them and install what we need and get the feed URL when we need it. So you search for LoboVirtualDesktop, open the LoboVirtualDesktop Fast Info answer here, and scroll down a little to the initial setup section. And here we're going to install the Microsoft Remote Desktop Client for macOS. So go ahead and click that link. That should take you to a browser, which in turn takes you to the App Store. Go ahead and click install. And it's worth noting there's an older version of Microsoft Remote Desktop for Mac as well. So I recommend that if you already have installed, remove all the versions you have, then install this version. So that's been installed, so go ahead and open that. We're going to be interested in workspaces, so click on workspaces and add workspace. And this is where that handy fast info comes into play again. So go ahead and go back to that in Safari. And there's a workspace URL we need to copy out of here and paste into the client. And you only have to do this one time during initial setup. Once you've done this, it'll remember it. So we'll go ahead and copy the feed URL that we're using here. And then we will go back to the Microsoft Remote Desktop app and we'll paste in that feed or workspace URL here. And this should go out and automatically detect that there's something at the other end of that. And sure enough, there we go. So there is, in fact, a valid workspace URL. We'll go ahead and do add on this. And here you'll log in with your LoboMail credentials. So this will be netid@unm.edu. And your login experience may differ slightly. You might have a slightly different login page, and that's okay. So anyway, once you've done that, now you can see these are the desktops and apps that I've been entitled to. So the desktops have a little desktop icon. We're going to go ahead and click LoboVirtualDesktop to launch our desktop. And here you have to log in a second time with your NetID and password. So the first time you log in, this may take a little while. Subsequent logins are generally pretty quick, we're talking sub 30 seconds. The first login, it really depends, if you logged into that particular Lobo Virtual Desktop instance before, your internet connection speed, depending on that, that could take up to a minute or so on first login. But as you log in, things will get faster and faster. So subsequent attempts, you really shouldn't have much of a delay. And so this is Lobo Virtual Desktop. So as you can see on my Mac now, I'm seeing this Windows 10 desktop with some apps pre-installed. Nice UNM background, so I could launch any of these Adobe apps. It's basically like I'm running Windows 10 on my Mac, but I'm not really. This is just being delivered to me remotely. So the next thing I recommend you do is get OneDrive set up. So yeah, some more apps installed here. You can see the entire Adobe suite. So I'll go ahead and search for OneDrive and open the OneDrive app. And you're going to enter your UNM Lobo Mail email address here and click sign in, and you'll have to authenticate yet again here. So use your Lobo Mail or NetID password. And this is where I'm getting two-factor. So yeah, I knew I was going to get this eventually. This is actually another feature that we're rolling out to improve security. I have another Tech Days presentation about that if you're interested, but let me go ahead and complete that. And since this is a Lobo Virtual Desktop machine, I'm going to go ahead and allow the organization to manage it. If this were my personal device, I probably wouldn't, but this OneDrive instance, remember, is actually running in Lobo Virtual Desktop. It's not actually running on your Mac, so I'll go ahead and do that and complete the OneDrive setup process here. And so if you're wondering, the reason for OneDrive is this really makes data transfer to and from Lobo Virtual Desktop very easy and very seamless. There are other ways you can do it with folder redirection and things like that, but they tend to be sluggish and cumbersome. So using OneDrive is really the recommended mechanism here. So what you probably want to do is, install OneDrive on your personal machine as well. Again, don't check that Manage My Device option. So that way, things that you create on your personal machine, when you go to this Lobo Virtual Desktop machine and are accessing OneDrive, they'll be there. And if you save and make some change in Lobo Virtual Desktop into OneDrive, then that change will synchronize back to your local machine. So OneDrive is definitely the preferred way to keep your data in sync between all of your devices, Lobo Virtual Desktop included. So by now, hopefully you're pretty excited about Lobo Virtual Desktop and are ready to request access. So let's talk about that in this slide. We tried to make this a pretty smooth and self-service process as much as we could. So you don't have to open a help desk ticket or do anything like that or call anyone. You can do this anytime, 24/7. It's really just a matter of submitting an online form, and for most requests, access is provisioned immediately. So the steps are just quickly, go to fastinfo.unm.edu, search for Lobo Virtual Desktop. You should find Fast Info Answer 7828 in the list, so go ahead and open that. You would download and install the remote desktop client for your device using the links in that Fast Info, and then you would just click Request Access in that Fast Info and fill out the form. So let's take a look at that process. I don't think there's anything that's super challenging or weird, but just to be sure, we'll go ahead and take a look. So remember, the first step is go to fastinfo.unm.edu. That's easy enough. And we'll search for Lobo Virtual Desktop. And here's the Lobo Virtual Desktop Fast Info Answer. We'll go ahead and open that up. And really part of the reason for going to this Fast Info is just the link to the request form is kind of long and hard to memorize, so that's why I recommend you do it this way. But so go ahead and scroll down this Fast Info, and pretty much everything you need is under this initial setup section here. So the first thing you would do is you would click the version of the client that you need to download. And this is the Microsoft Remote Desktop Client. So we have Windows 32 or 64-bit, probably be using 64-bit. We have the client for Mac, the client for Android, client for iOS, and these links take you to the App Store for those respective devices. So you go and click one of those links for whatever device you need to download and install the client for, go ahead and install it, and then finally you'd click this Request Access link here. And this will bring up the request form. And there may be slight changes to this over time, but all in all, this should remain pretty much similar. So you come here and choose your affiliation. So we'll say I'm a student, and you only have one option here for full desktop. You choose full desktop, and then you can just choose a reason that you're requesting access. You could do just testing if you want, or if any of these others apply, go ahead and check those. And that doesn't really affect your Lobo Virtual Desktop experience. It's just more for us in terms of data gathering and trying to understand how people are using this solution. You're just trying it out, do submit. And there we go. So my request has been submitted. So usually within 5 or 10 minutes, I'll get an email of my UNM Lobo Mail account saying that my access has been provisioned. So I mentioned before, these things are kind of split out by affiliation. So if you did want to try the app experience, as you'll notice for both student and faculty, these are both the full desktop experience. If you want to try out the app experience, you can just choose staff as your affiliation, and these are the apps that we have available. So a lot of these aren't super interesting, and that's why the full desktop experience is really recommended for students and faculty. But if there's something you want to try, I don't know, maybe Office 365 apps or something, you can go do that. And likewise, if you're staff and you want to try the full desktop experience because you want to use Adobe Creative Cloud or something like that, you would just choose faculty or student affiliation, full desktop, and submit it that way. So that's the request process. I hope that's pretty straightforward and works pretty well. Again, we tried to kind of streamline that compared to some of the processes we usually come up with. So we hope that it's seamless and quick and frictionless to request access. Awesome, we made it. That's the end of this presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you learned something new and got some valuable information from this. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment on the video and I'll do my best to follow up on those as they come in. Of course, you can also open a ticket at help.unm using either the website or by calling 505-277-5757. Hope you have a good summer and rest of the day and take care.